Welcome to UN Week here in New York and here at the Council on Foreign Relations. And we are honored and thrilled to begin it with Prime Minister Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan. He has been Prime Minister for just over a year. Prior to that, he was a member of the National Assembly. Before politics, he served as UNICEF's Special Representative for Sports, had a small career in the world of sports, where he is widely recognized as one of the great cricket players in history and led Pakistan's national team to victory at the World Cup. A lot of other things. He was at Oxford in the early and mid 1970s, with others, Tony Blair, Benazir Bhutto, and quite a few other distinguished people who went on to have extraordinary careers. The way we're going to do it is the Prime Minister and I will have a conversation for a few minutes. Bless you, somebody. And then we will open it up to you, to the members, for questions. Prime Minister also, I should say, has a packed schedule. So we are going to try to end this so he can brave the traffic by just under an hour from now. Ask you to remain seated when he goes. I can't resist, so one question. First of all, again, thank you and welcome, sir. One question about your previous life. Is there anything that you took from your previous life of cricket that has served you well in the world of politics that you now find yourself?
Well, Richard, thank you very much first for inviting me here, giving me an opportunity to talk about my country. Cricket, like any sport, I think it teaches you the most invaluable lesson of life. And basically that is that whenever you are aiming at some goal in life, it teaches you how to struggle, the ability to take the bad times, the setbacks. So the quality of success is not how you handle the good times, it's how you handle the bad times and how you cope with them, how you learn from the setbacks, not get demoralized. So that's the only way I could struggle for 22 years before I got into this position.
Well, speaking of struggle, let's talk about your economy for a minute, if we may. Over the years, I believe Pakistan and the International Monetary Fund have reached more than a dozen agreements. You just reached one rather recently, I think on the scale of $6 billion. You yourself, when you ran for this job, you were critical of it, yet you've now entered into it. Why is Pakistan having such difficulty economically that it has to repeatedly turn to the IMF?
You see, it's the moment you have a deficit, whether it is current account or fiscal deficit, means you're not managing your economy properly, and it's just like a household. If the house is going into a deficit, you have to raise your income, cut your expenditure. So this inability of successful governments to manage our economy is why we keep landing up with the IMF. We inherited, unfortunately, the biggest current account deficit in Pakistan's history. And so the first year has been a real struggle to basically fix this deficit. And I'm very proud to say that we have really cut down this deficit almost by 70%. We now have an economy which is heading in the right direction. Simple reason was that previously we had a 5% growth rate, but that was based on imports. This time what we are doing is restructuring the economy so that it's an export-based growth rate, which is really how an economy goes up. So that has been the main reason why we had to go to the IMF, because we had this huge current account deficit.
Also wanted to talk about your relationship with China. Pakistan is on the short list of the countries that receives the most Belt and Road investment from China. So there's really, two questions flow from it. Won't this dramatically exacerbate your debt challenge, given the nature of Chinese support? And how does Pakistan make the claim that it's going to retain its full sovereignty, given that it's allowing or inviting China in to do projects on such a scale?
First, let me just say that the situation which we found ourselves in when 13 months ago we came into power was probably the worst economic situation. And so China really helped us when we were right at the rock bottom. They helped us, supported our, by giving us funds for our foreign exchange reserves, very important at that time. In fact, we were staring at a default. So China helped us along with Saudi Arabia and UAE to beef up our reserves. And what China offers us right now as an opportunity, they have a $2 trillion import market. And so China has given us a preferential trade agreement where we can export to China at the same terms as the ASEAN countries. So this is a great opportunity. Apart from that, we have this opportunity now to get Chinese industry to relocate in Pakistan, bring in technology. So China has given us a great opportunity to lift ourselves up from where we are right now.
I want to talk, and I want to try to cover a lot of different subjects before we turn to the members here. They asked the tough questions, by the way. I'm here to lull you into a sense of complacency. I want to talk about U.S.-Pakistani relations. In full disclosure, I've been involved with them many times in the U.S. Government, and each side has something of a narrative of frustration, even bitterness, or with the other. But I want to quote a sentence or two from the memoir of Jim Mattis. James, until recently, was the U.S. Secretary of Defense. And I'm quoting here. Of all the countries I've dealt with, I consider Pakistan to be the most dangerous because of the radicalization of its society and the availability of nuclear weapons. James Mattis is a respected, temperate man. So when you hear someone like that writing those words, what is your reaction?
Just that I do not think James Mattis fully understands why Pakistan became radicalized. There's just a short history which everyone may or may not know. In 1980s, when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, Pakistan, along with the United States, helped by the United States, we organized the resistance to the Soviets. And the resistance was organized by Pakistani ISI training these militants who were invited from all over the Muslim world to do jihad against the Soviet Union. And so we created these militant groups to fight the Soviets. Then, of course, fighting the Soviets, jihad was glorified. And I never forget when Ronald Reagan invited the Mujahideen leaders to Washington, and he said they reminded him, and I quote, the moral equivalence of the founding fathers of the United States. So jihad was, jihadis were heroes then. Come 1989, Soviets leave Afghanistan. The United States packs up and leaves Pakistan with a lot of those who would have reminded Ronald Reagan of the moral equivalence of founding fathers, and we were left with these groups. And then comes 9/11, and Pakistan again joined the US in the war on terror, and now we are required to go after these groups as terrorists, who were now, they were indoctrinated that fighting foreign occupation is jihad. But now when the US arrived in Afghanistan, it was supposed to be terrorism. So Pakistan took a real battering in this. I have to say, Richard, I opposed this from day one. I said we had first trained these guys to fight jihad, and it was a great idea, and now we are telling the same groups it's terrorism. So we should at least have stayed neutral. Pakistan, by joining the US after 9/11, committed one of the biggest blunders. 70,000 Pakistanis died in this. We had Uh, some say over 150 billion, some say 200 billion, some economists, Pakistanis, 200 billion lost to the economy. And on top of it, we were blamed for the US not winning in Afghanistan. I thought it was the worst period for Pakistan. The lessons learned now, I think the Pakistan government should not have pledged what they could not deliver. How could they deliver? There were insider attacks in the Pakistan army. The groups that were close to the Pakistan army, the army was now trying to kill them. So in a nutshell, when matters...
Isn't, though, the criticism fair that you are partially responsible for our difficulties in Afghanistan because Pakistan continues to accord sanctuary, provide sanctuary to the Taliban, and even if you can't always succeed against radicals who are on your territory, it seems to me it's totally legitimate for the United States to expect 100% effort. And at times we have argued and we would argue that the effort is anything but 100%.
You know, look, here was someone who kept saying that there's never going to be a military solution in Afghanistan. I kept telling Pakistan government whenever I had a chance. I came here in 2008. President Obama had not taken office. I spoke to senior Democrats. I told them that there will never be a military solution in Afghanistan simply because I have read the history of Afghanistan. You just have to read the history. They fight each other. The moment a foreigner comes through, they all get together and the resistance starts. Started with the British, 3 times the British tried. The Soviets killed 1 million Afghans. There was still, the resistance was stronger after 1 million Afghans had been killed. So I kept trying to tell this. I tried to explain to, I remember meeting Joe Biden, John Kerry, Harry Reid. I tried to explain, and I realized they hadn't a clue. No one understood Afghanistan. The politicians didn't understand what was going on. And this madness kept going on, and Pakistan kept being blamed. Now, Pakistan had right now, but it had even more. We have 2.7 million Afghan refugees in Pakistan. There are camps of 500,000 refugees living there. How do we know who's coming in and going out? Clearly, this was not from Pakistan, the idea that there were these insurgents going from Pakistan. How are we? First of all, the tribal area bordering Afghanistan, there is no border there. The Durand line is a line made by the British, which there is no border there. Now we are fencing the border. Because of the allegations that fighters are going from Pakistan, we are fencing the border. We've also time and time said that, look, if you want Pakistan to completely stop anyone going across, then take the refugees back, 2.7 billion people. But it's not possible that that 2.7 million refugees there and expect Pakistan to completely shut the border. Having said that, I do not think that it's because of Pakistan the US has not been able to succeed in Afghanistan, simply because there is a history behind it. It was never going to happen. And fortunately, President Trump has done, by him forcing there to be a dialogue, and then this peace deal, which was just about to be signed. This is painful for us. The peace deal was about to be signed, and President Trump has, we read it in the papers. I mean, we should have at least been discussed with us. But now I'm meeting President Trump later on, and I will try and tell him that, look, there's not going to be a military solution. For 19 years, if you have not been able to succeed, you're not going to be able to succeed in another 19 years.
I actually agree with you that there can't be a military solution. What I doubt is that there could be a peace deal that holds. So even if there were an agreement with the Taliban, what is there about the DNA of the Taliban that leads you to believe that any peace they would sign would be anything more than tactical?
I feel that this is not the Taliban which was there when in 2001, who was displaced by the US. Things have changed. They say that you only cross the river once. this is realities have changed. They have learned. Uh, this is Taliban realized that they cannot control whole of Afghanistan. The Afghan government knows that they cannot, there needs to be some sort of a peace deal. There has to be a political settlement. Let's just face it. You only have two choices. Either you fight or you have some sort of a political settlement. There's no point in fighting anymore. I wish that this deal had been signed, there would have been ceasefire, and then we would have proceeded towards the only way there's going to be, the US is going to eventually take the troops out and there'll be peace there. So I agree with you, Richard, it's going to be tough. I never for 1 minute assumed that this is going to be easy, but it is the only way.
Actually, I actually think there is a slightly different way, which is one idea is we would fight for military victory. I agree with you, that's not within reach. I am profoundly skeptical of a peace agreement. The third approach, for as long as it takes, is to support the government and basically preserve what you can in Afghanistan so it can't again become a basis for terrorist attacks. It's not a solution, but the United States has kept forces in other countries for more than half a century. We have supported governments. It's not a solution, but it might be preferable to a situation of Taliban control over the country.
I don't think Taliban will be able to control the whole country. I think there will be a settlement. Look, people of Afghanistan have suffered for 40 years. I mean, it is inhuman what they're going through. Anyone with any humane feelings would want there to be peace there. Every day there are bomb blasts going and people dying. So anything to actually stop this, again, Richard, I agree with you that after the 17 years of bloodshed and the way things have gone, I agree that it's not going to be easy. But I also don't think that if we go the other way, it'll be just more of the same. If Taliban today are stronger than they were for, maybe in 2010, when the last time there was chance of a peace talks, when Holbrooke was there, they're much stronger than that now. And when they see that the US is about to leave, their morale is up.
Exactly. Which is why some of us are skeptical. But
no, so what I mean is that military is not the solution. If they're now feeling stronger than before, they're not going to be able to give up if you kill or bomb more of them.
I'm going to move on, but thank you. I think it's an important exchange. Osama bin Laden, when he was found and killed by American troops, he was just outside of your capital. Has there ever been a Pakistani investigation, a government investigation, as to how that could have happened? That he could have been living there for so long?
There has been an investigation, but I don't know whether as far as I know, the Abbottabad commission sat down, and I don't know what the conclusion was. But I can tell you one thing. You see, I again go back. The Pakistani army, ISI, trained Al-Qaeda and all these groups to fight in Afghanistan. There were always links between there had to be links because they trained them. Now, as I said, after 9/11, when we did a 180-degree turn and went after those groups, not everyone agreed with us. But in the army, people didn't agree with us. And so, as I said, there were more insider attacks in Pakistan. General Musharraf, there were 2 attacks on him, suicide attacks on him, which were insider from within the army. So people, so as far as I know, and I think there was a statement by President Obama that Pakistan military, the army chief, the ISI chief, had no idea about this. Because I think they were listening, to their conversation the night the raid took place. And they said so. So if there was, it was probably at lower levels who already had contacts.
I wanted to follow up on something, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but in the modern history of Pakistan, I would say most outsiders, when they look at the prime minister as a position, and they look at the strength of the chief of staff of the Army and the head of the ISI, the Intelligence Directorate, they would say the preponderance of power is in the hands of the other two individuals, the head of the Army and the head of intelligence. Is that a fair characterization? So do you really feel limited in what you can do as Prime Minister?
Look, in any democracy or any form of government, democracies function because of moral authority. If democracies lose their moral authority, then the physical strength and authority lies with the army. In our country, because space was given due to a lack of moral authority, because of corrupt governments, the army, naturally, there's no vacuum, so it moved in. I can tell you that since I have been 13 months in power, every policy of mine is in our manifesto. We wanted peace with all our neighbors. We opened the Kartarpur corridor, opening up. Normally, this would have had security implications. Our security forces would have resisted. Our policy with Afghanistan, which we reached out immediately to Afghanistan, to President Ghani. I have invited him to Pakistan. We speak regularly if there's any issue. Every policy of my government, which was peace with our neighbors, has been backed by the Pakistan Army. I'll even go further. The only time the Pakistan Army has cut its military budget is when my government started an austerity campaign and they followed, and they actually took a cut in their military spending. It's never happened before. I can tell you that all policies of my government have been completely backed by the army. When I spoke to Mr. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, I told him, I said, look, my country stands with me because we want peace. We have decided, we have a new policy with Afghanistan, with India. We want a new beginning. You take one step towards us, we come towards you. And he sort of said, are you sure? Meaning that is the army behind? The army completely stands with us, with our policies. So in past, it may be true, and I repeat, it's because governments lose. When democratic governments don't have militant wings, they have only moral authority, and that's much more powerful than physical authority.
Just two more questions for me. Since you raised India, I wanted to get to it. It may have been your hope to have improved relations with India. Needless to say, it hasn't worked out that way. So, and along the way, you said some pretty brutal things about Prime Minister Modi and about the philosophy of the BJP and so forth. So what is a realistic path? Because one analogy I often draw is at the height of the Cold War, the US-Soviet relationship had far more dimensions to it, far more substance to it than the India-Pakistan relationship has now, in terms of diplomatic contacts, economic contacts, and the rest. So how do we take this relationship between two nuclear-armed rivals that have a history of conflict? How do we make sure the future doesn't resemble the past?
Well, Richard, let me say one thing. This is very sad where we stand today. From day one, I have written letters. I've spoken to Prime Minister Modi about we have common issues. We have poverty. Poverty is big in the subcontinent. Any government that should come, the number one priority should be to deal with poverty. Climate change. We stand the subcontinent. I mean, our glaciers are melting at a rapid rate. We need to combine together because there are hundreds and millions of people that are going to be affected. So I called him up and I said, look, let's just have a new chapter. Let's reset our relationship. And he talked about terrorism, and I said, look, I give you an assurity. It's not because of pressure from India or anyone. It's a policy that we will not allow any militant groups in Pakistan. We were dismantling from day one, and again, I talk about the army. Had the army not helped us, we would not be able to dismantle these militant organizations, a legacy of the 80s. And they were helping us. So I told him, I said, let's base a relationship on mutual trust. because, problem we have is the two countries didn't trust each other. Our foreign minister was supposed to meet last year in this UNGA, and suddenly India canceled. And then we thought maybe, they don't want to get closer because of the Indian elections, because it's a nationalist, BJP is a nationalist party. One of the agenda, of course, is, they're hard on Pakistan. So we stayed back. Then, of course, Pulwama happened, where this Kashmiri boy blew himself on an Indian convoy. Immediately, we were blamed. I went on air, I said, look, you give us any indication that a Pakistani was involved, we'll take action. They bombed us. The jets came and they bombed us, and so we retaliated, no loss of life, but on the way, two of the jets went down, one in Pakistan. The pilot we captured, we immediately gave him back, saying you didn't want any escalation. But what did, in the election campaign, it was all about how Pakistan was petrified, and that's why they quickly returned the pilot, and how Pakistan will be taught a lesson. The whole election campaign, you just have to read. It was all about anti-Pakistan and how Pakistan would be taught a lesson. We still thought, okay, let the elections be over. We'll again resume. Elections are over, and we again resume at nothing. And then we find India is pushing us in the blacklist of FATF to bankrupt us. That's when we started thinking this is something, there's some sort of an agenda going on. And then, of course, Kashmir took place on 5th August. Unilaterally, they cast aside the UN Security Council resolution, the Simla Accord, which was bilateral between us, their own constitution, Article 370. And that's when, where you said, I said all those things, that's when I have said that this is an agenda. This is an RSS agenda which they are following. And I'm afraid, I worry now where we are, where the two countries are. That's why before that I asked President Trump to intervene and play a role in this. Because whenever we ask for other countries, United Nations to help, India says it's a bilateral issue. When we try to talk to them, they said there's nothing to talk about. So it's very important. It's two nuclear-armed countries facing each other, like this incident happened in February. I, as the Prime Minister of a country, am saying that anything can happen in such situations. You don't know what can happen. We should never be in this situation. That's why I will be speaking in UN. I would want the United Nations to play a role. This is why the United Nations came into being. This could have effects way beyond the subcontinent.
Since India's tradition, not just this government, but other governments, has been not to accept third-party mediation, it seems to me it's beholden on India and Pakistan to essentially break this dynamic, which has obviously gotten worse after what's happened in Kashmir. Might it not make sense for Pakistan, and given where we began our conversation, you've got economic priorities and the rest, the last thing you need is a worsening strategic situation in South Asia. Might it not make sense for Pakistan to think of a way of at least reestablishing some sort of an opening for diplomacy?
Richard, look at the situation right now. There are 8 million Kashmiris for 50 days have been shut inside. 50 days, 900,000 Indian troops have shut in their homes, 8 million Kashmiris. How am I going to talk about what? And unilaterally, they have reneged on international laws. This was a disputed territory, Kashmir, between Pakistan and India. The United Nations, the Security Council, had given the people of Kashmir the right of self-determination, which was never given to them. Now, how do we start talking to anyone? How can we speak to India? At least what I expect the international community to do is to ask them to lift the curfew. It's inhuman. It's violation of every humanitarian right of the people of Kashmir.
I should just tell the members here before I go to questions is that the Indian Foreign Minister will be here later this week, so I expect we will return some of these.
And I hope you'll ask proper questions to him. Not be too diplomatic.
So we will have Ambassador Foreign Minister Jaishankar here. So it's now the appointed hour. Remember, this is on the record, and please, the shorter the questions are, the more succinct, the more we can get in. Mickey, you had your hand up. Just wait for a microphone. Let us know who you are and your organizational affiliation.
Hi, good morning. I'm Minky Worden from Human Rights Watch. Our discussion today has proceeded without any mention of rights for 150 million women and girls in Pakistan. As Human Rights Watch has documented, there are serious problems with access to education, forced marriage, child marriage, and honor killings. What are your plans to deliver justice and accountability for women and girls? Thanks.
Our main plank of our manifesto is rule of law. All the things you're saying is because we have weak enforcement of law. We have laws protecting women, we have laws protecting the weak, the minorities, and at times when these violations take place, it's because our enforcement, our implementation is weak. But I can tell you right now, 13 months, we have taken steps to protect our minorities. We have taken steps to protect the worship places of the minorities. The initiative which we have taken with the Sikh community is opening up the Kartarpur corridor is unprecedented. We are now in the process of restoring places of worship because Pakistan was also the center of Buddhist civilization and also the Hindu shrines. So my concept of Pakistan is where our minorities are equal citizens. They have all their rights are protected. All the women, the weaker sections, the poor people in our country, we have come up with the biggest ever poverty alleviation program despite our fiscal constraints. It is one of the, in our history, it's the biggest poverty alleviation campaign which we've started. So to sum it up, my idea of Pakistan is basically rule of law and not just protecting the weaker sections of the society, but also helping those areas of Pakistan that have stayed back, like FATA. FATA has merged with Pakistan for the first time with KP, and we have spent funds to rehabilitate the people of FATA because of the war on terror.
Just so you understand, in the World Economic Forum report, Pakistan comes in literally second to last in terms of the gender gap. So is what you're saying that the challenge is to enforce existing laws, or do you really need new laws and new programs to help girls and women have opportunity?
You don't need new laws, but you need special packages for those sections of the society which have been left behind, which includes, this program we have is one of the biggest, the most comprehensive program for women in rural areas to lift them out of poverty.
Sure. Jeffrey.
Jeff Laurenti. Mr. Prime Minister, following up on your answer just now, which broadened the aperture from women to the minorities in Pakistan, and Richard's earlier question about radicalization there. You have seen bombings of Shiite mosques in Quetta and elsewhere, the assassination of Governor Salman Taseer by an Islamic extremist, the capital death penalty case of Asia Bibi, who was finally allowed out of Pakistan for being a Christian who didn't entirely reverence the Prophet Muhammad. And you have publishers who are fearful of Islamist attacks and such. Is there any progress to be made on reforming those blasphemy laws? And how pervasive is the sense of the tiny minority fundamentalists being able to employ violence in order to enforce religious conformity? And you get help from elsewhere in the Muslim world, like Saudi Arabia, at being able to progress toward a more moderate Islam?
Okay, first let me clear one thing. There is only one Islam. There's no such thing as moderate Islam or radical Islam. I even heard yesterday that there was this radical Islam. There is only one Islam. Islam, like all human communities, has its radicals, majority moderates, and then, of course, some lunatics who every human society has it. There you might have your racists. When I first went to England, there were these skinheads who would beat up people because of the color of their skin. So there is only one Islam, and the Islam we follow is the Islam of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that Islam, according to the Prophet, all of us are born children of Adam, so we are all equal, regardless of our color of our skin. That Islam gave complete rights to minorities. In the state of Medina he created, a Jewish citizen wins a case against the Khalifa, the head of state. He loses the cases against a Jewish citizen, which means that they were equal citizens if they could stand and win against the head of state. That's the Islam we follow. In my vision of Islam, all human beings, regardless of their religion, are equal. Now, if we have not been able to enforce our laws, it's because, unfortunately, we have ruling elites that have kept themselves above law. And when that happens, and Pakistan is not the only country like this. There are countries where you have sections of populations, the elites, above the law. And when that happens, there is no rule of law. Then might is right. So my party is called Tehreek-e-Insaf, Movement for Justice. And justice means justice for all human beings. In fact, for me, justice means for animals too. Because in the state of Medina, who we look up, for Muslims, there is only one model, and that is the Prophet created the state of Medina. That state of Medina gave rights to women first time, property rights. That state of Medina first introduced progressive taxation. First welfare state. State took responsibility of handicapped, widows, poor. That state of Medina had rule of law. No one was above law. So, and as I quote, a Jewish citizen could win a case against the head of state. That's the state we want. That's the ideal we move to. Unfortunately, close to that ideal, and this is why 13 months down the line, we have, at least what we have done is, no one would have touched the criminals who plundered our country. No one would have been able to put them in jail because there was one law for the powerful and the other for the weak. So it's a process. It's not going to happen overnight, but this is my ideal.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your comments. My name is Rina Amiri. I'm from NYU, and I'm an Afghan American. And you're right that Afghans are tired of war. They desperately want peace. And they supported Ambassador Khalilzad's efforts. But it was a peace process that left them deeply anxious. And they felt it was imbalanced in favor of the Taliban and that it emboldened the Taliban. They would seek the support of Pakistan for reigniting peace talks, but one in which a number of the issues that they are concerned about are on the table, including having talks with the Afghan government either directly or through proximity talks. They want more explicit language from the Taliban on women's rights and minority rights. And they want more explicit language denouncing terrorism or links to al-Qaeda, none of which were there when this agreement was nearly signed. Thank you. I would just like your comments, and if that peace process, if and hopefully when it's reignited, what support can the Afghan people get from Pakistan in this regard? Thank you.
Well, number one, what the people of Afghanistan have gone through, forget me as a Pakistani, as a human being, we should all pray that they have peace. Because, you know, you hear every day on a daily basis the sort of bloodshed that's going on. Now, I just repeat very quickly, there are only two ways right now. One is we keep going this way, which is military action, and I believe this will just keep going on. And because the Taliban, the moment they realize that the Americans already, they've cut the troops down, and if they think they're leaving, I mean, they are not going to give up, with more military action. The other is peace talks. Now, peace talks, once they start, all this can be thrashed out. I honestly believe that this is not the Taliban of 2001. There's a lot of things that have happened, and I believe that they will be more accommodating. The Taliban delegation wanted to meet me. Problem was that the Afghan government did not want me to meet the Taliban delegation, so I did not meet them. But I told President Ghani, I said, look, if I meet them, I would try and convince them about all the things you're saying. And not only that, I would try and convince them that the Taliban must talk to the Afghan government. At the moment, they're only talking to the Americans. There are no direct talks between Taliban and the Afghan government. I would have tried my best. Because finally, I mean, yes, they've looked back in 2001 and that period, and they think that, the way Taliban behaved at the time, minorities and so on, with the attitude to women. But I think once the talk starts, I think all these things will eventually fall into place because the people of Afghanistan, both sides, want peace right now.
Jeffrey Rosen.
Thank you. Jeffrey Rosen from Lazard. You described earlier the relationship with China that's been developing, an economic relationship. I'm curious how you reconcile that relationship with reports about the treatment by the Chinese of Muslim churches, Muslim mosques, the practice of Islam in China. Whether you're able to use this as the relationship as a means of pressuring the Chinese to perhaps relax in that treatment, and if not, whether you raise the risk of perhaps some of the more radical elements of Islam in Pakistan, acknowledging there's not radical Islams, but there are radical Islamic people who practice Islam who are radical, whether you run the risk of a reaction from them domestically, which could unsettle the country, your country.
Particularly given what the Chinese are doing, with the Uyghurs.
Look, with the Chinese, we have a special relationship, and it's the way China functions. Any of issues like these, we talk to them privately. We don't make public statements because that's how China is. And I again repeat, China has come to a help when we were right at the rock bottom. So I would not publicly talk about it, but just, as someone who has taken over Pakistan 13 months ago, faced the biggest economic crisis, so dealing with that. We have a problem in Afghanistan trying to settle that. We are worried about what would happen now with Iran and Saudi Arabia, the United States. That's the other border. So one border Iran, the other Afghanistan, and now with India. I think I've got enough on my plate right now. Wouldn't you say, Richard? What would you do if you were in my position? You'll probably have a heart attack by now.
Unlikely. I would welcome that conversation.
Listen, the only reason I can cope with these pressures is because, when you walk out not a lot of you won't understand cricket, but imagine, you're walking out on a cricket field, there are 90,000 people in the stadium. You walk 70 yards down into the middle of the pitch, and the worry that you can be out first ball and you will have to walk all the way back with 90,000 people. So that takes character. It builds. So you are able to play under pressure once you cope with that. And that's the only way I have coped. And Richard, you would not have been able to. I'm telling you.
Every golfer knows what it's like out there. at the first tee when the crowds are there.
Golf is a piece of cake compared to this.
It is, we could continue that, but I will show uncharacteristic discipline. Sure.
Michelle Caruso Cabrera, CNBC contributor, following on the conversation about China. Richard asked you very directly about maintaining your sovereignty in the face of so many Chinese loans, and you didn't answer it directly. I mean, you've talked about China coming in when you were rock bottom, but are you concerned about the trade-offs that that level of investment presents to Pakistan?
Absolutely not. I mean, for instance, I mean, what would China, how would it impinge on our sovereignty? Maybe they would say, don't have a good relationship with the US. But the Chinese have never, ever interfered in any of our foreign policy, in any of our domestic policy for that matter. I think China sees Pakistan as the CPEC, this economic corridor and the Belt and Road Initiative. They see this as a great opportunity for them. I think China is one country which we can all learn from. Their main concentration has been on trade and wealth creation and lifting the standard of living of their people. What I admire about China the most, in 30 years, they have taken 700 million people out of poverty. It's never been done in human history. And when I came, if you ask me, what is the one thing I want in Pakistan? Lift our 100 million Pakistanis out of poverty. This is our main thing. So that's where we have learned a lot from China, how they tackle poverty in these last 30 years. So the answer to the question, there have been no demands by China which restrict our sovereignty.
Are you not put off, though? China has accomplished what you said, but they've done it at a great price and cost in terms of democracy, human rights, and the rest, not just for Muslim Chinese, but for all Chinese. Are you not put off by that aspect of the cost of their development model?
Well, you know, who am I to comment on China? But the fact is that if any human society can accomplish this, you know, this is humane. This is taking people out of poverty. I mean, I admire that the most. For me, if I had, but I don't have, unfortunately, the Chinese model, and if I could order people around, and I could get people out of poverty. Not just that, the way they've tackled corruption. Unfortunately, I can't do that in Pakistan. 450 ministerial level people in the last 5 years have been put into jail on corruption. I mean, I wish I could do that in my country. But, you know, we have our limitations, but it has to be admired what they've done